In this lesson, we'll continue introducing TypeScript into view components. The next component is the progress empty state. So in here, as we can see, component does not have any logic, so there is nothing to use TypeScript for. We can move on to the next component, the timeline indicator component. And this component is used on the timeline page, and it is responsible for showing red horizontal line as an indicator of the current time of the day. So as always, in this component, the first thing we're gonna do is add attribute length with the value ts, and continue typing in elements of this component. As for this template ref, it is supposed to reference DOM element inside this component, and as we can see, this ref is attached to the element of the type HR, which represents basic horizontal line. And in TypeScript, we have types for every DOM element, and for HR element, the type will be HTML HR element. And just because this ref might not reference any DOM element until this component will be fully rendered on the page, it may also contain value null. So we're going to use union type to cover null type as well. So the next computed property top offset is supposed to return value of the type number. Let's explicitly say so in here. The next function is also going to return type number. And as for this expression, in here we are trying to reference method called getBoundingClientRect on the DOM element. But the thing is that not all DOM elements that parent node property can reference will have the method called getBoundingClientRect, which is why TypeScript highlights such usage. So in our case, instead of using parent node property, we can use parent element, and it is not going to make any difference in our case. And all parent elements are actually going to have getBoundingClientRect method. But of course, before our component will be rendered in the DOM, the parent element will be undefined. So let's prevent calling method getBoundingClientRect on undefined value by using optional chaining operator. And also, since we have specified that this function getTimelineHeight will return number at the end, let's use fallback in here, and if left side of this expression will return undefined or null, we're going to fallback to 0. This way we ensure that this function will always return numeric value. Next, I'd like to point your attention at another constant which is defined inside timelineItems.ts module, which is timelineItemRefs. This is also template ref, which is going to reference some of the DOM elements of some component. And let's see where this constant is currently used. So as we can see, it is used inside the timeline component, specifically to reference timeline item components. And just because here we're also using v4 directive, that means timeline item refs constant is going to reference array of timeline item components, because after executing v4 directive, we're gonna get several timeline item components rendered. And whenever we are using template refs on components instead of basic DOM elements, Vue has a special type that we can use to type such refs. The type is called component public instance. And of course, we also have to use null value in here, because until component will be rendered in the DOM, this template ref will not reference any element. And in our specific case, we also have to use square brackets to indicate that our timeline item refs is going to point to many Vue components. This type should be imported from the Vue library. And let's also add a keyword type in front of this type here. The other thing which is also related to usage of timelineItemRefs constant inside of this scroll to our function, and the reason TypeScript complains in here is because by the time when this function scroll to our will run, timelineItemRefs might not reference any DOM elements, so it can be null. And to prevent referencing properties on the null or undefined value, we need to ensure that the first part of this ternary expression will be executed instead. So we're going to add OR in here and check if timeline item refs.value will be falsy value. We're going to execute the first part of this expression to prevent referencing any properties on the null value. Also, we have to find a proper type for this constant EL. So in here we're seeing that the first part of this ternary expression is going to return body DOM element. And for the body DOM element, TypeScript has type called HTML body element. Let's use this type in here. And also we have to determine what type of the element will be when the second part of this ternary expression will be executed. And for this, we have to go inside that component where this timeline item refs is used, which is inside timeline item component. So it is actually used directly on top of timeline item component. Now we have to find out what root element is contained inside timeline item component. As we can see in here, the root element is li element. So let's switch back to timelineitems.ts file, and as the second type of the element this ternary expression will return, we're going to use HTML li element. So we're using union of two different types of DOM elements in here, HTML body element as well as HTML li element. And this way we are covering all types of values this ternary expression might produce. Now I would like to click around in the application a little bit to ensure that after all recent modification, we haven't broken our application. As we can see so far it looks good, so let's switch back in the editor and take a look at another thing inside the timeline indicator component. Earlier, we have specified the type for indicator ref as a union of types HTML element and null. But if we will actually take a look at the type of this indicator ref variable now, we're gonna see that it uses a union of three different types instead of union of two types, just like we have specified. And the reason to that is because we have not specified any initial value for this constant, which is why as initial value it uses undefined. So to fix this problem, we just have to specify initial value as null. And now we're gonna see a union of two types. With that, we're finishing this lesson. As always, link to the source code will be in the description.